Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to make some Golabki soup, which is a cabbage roll soup with little mini meatballs in it, and some persimmon persimmon muffins. I wish we were making some money. Persimmon muffins. So let's start by getting our bacon cooking up for our soup, because when I make my cabbage rolls, I have bacon draped over the top of them to give them a great little flavor. So we are going to use about a half pound of bacon here. So I'm just going to kind of cut my package in half and then we'll take out. And that way I can save my other package to use on another recipe for another day. And we're going to snip these guys up into small pieces and we're going to let them kind of cook up for this. And I just find it's easier to use kitchen shears than to try to cut it on a cutting board. And then you can just pop all of these into the sink when we're done with them. But we're just gonna cut a little strips, and as it starts to cook, they'll break apart, so you don't have to worry about separating them. But this is gonna give you that nice bacony flavor that I always put on my cabbage rolls. Here. And you could always use a little bit less, but it's bacon. Gotta love bacon. And I feel like the bacon just plays really well with the cabbage and it's just going to make it delicious. So let me wash my hands real quick. And then we'll turn this guy on and we'll let him start cooking up. And while we're doing that, let's work on our muffins. So I have some very ripe persimmons, which is perfect because I'm going to scoop them out. And we need about a cup of persimmon mashed up. So having them very ripe where they're a little bit past ripe for eating will make them very sweet, kind of similar to like a banana in here. And then we're going to scoop out the really delicious flesh, which has kind of a nice, sweet honey type base for it. So just kind of scoop it out. We don't want the skin or anything like this. And then I'll use a fork in a little bit to kind of mash it up. But just try to get as much as you can out of there. And I need about, a cup. So I'm thinking 4 persimmons should get me to a 4 good, these are pretty good size persimmons should get me there. And then we're going to season it up with some kind of good fall spices. We're going to use some cinnamon, pumpkin pie spice, and ginger and vanilla to really get these, enhance the flavors and get them, whoop, a little messy there, going there. Lovely. And again, you want them, a lot of times when you buy them from the store, they're like really firm and hard. You need to let them soften up for this so that they can mash up nicely. Okay. And it's really easy to scoop out. They're not too difficult to scoop out. The flesh, as long as it's nice and ripe, the flesh comes out fairly easy. And here we go. So let me toss these guys, and then I'm just going to use my fork to really mash it up to get them nice and kind of smushed so that you can put them in our muffin without having super chunks. You could always pop it through a like a blender or a food processor or an immersion blender to get it more into a puree, but I find just your good old fork here is going to get you there. And this is going to be for our persimmon muffins. We are going to add some sourdough discard in here just to give it, you be able to use a little bit of it. And I feel like it makes muffins so moist when you do that. Okay, we've got these pretty fairly well mashed up. Think about like a banana. They don't have to be completely pureed. We're going to add in a half cup of butter, which is 1 stick of melted butter. I'm going to grab my spatula here. We'll mix that up. And let me grab some tongs here to give this bacon a little bit of a toss. Now that my Dutch oven's warmed up, I'm going to turn this down to about a 5, so smack dab in the middle. Just use your tongs here to break up a little bit of that bacon. And the bacon is going to be absolutely just add this lovely flavor to our soup.
You got a question? What does persimmons taste like?
They've got a kind of a sweet, honey, kind of tangy flavor to it. Let me grab a little piece, that way I can describe it even better. It's got this sweetness to it, and I want to say it's more mellow. It's not a strong flavor. There was a little bit of butter in there as well. I realized I put the butter in there. But I'm trying to describe what other fruit it's very similar to.
Someone offered a mix of a pear and a cantaloupe.
I can definitely see that. I'm going to say it's such a unique flavor on there. It's sweet and mellow, but so it's not a super like astringent flavor. And it plays really well with fall spices, but it's hard to describe on there because it has an interesting texture to it. And then you've got these, I don't know, it's just hard. I'm not very good at describing things when I don't know, when I don't have a really good comparison for it. Okay, we're going to add in a cup of brown sugar. You could use white sugar for this, but again, I'm laying in on the fall spices and brown sugar just goes better with that. Wash a little sugar off my hands. Okay, we're going to mix these together and then we'll add in our discard and our spices. And as you're mixing, just kind of use the back of your spatula to mash up your persimmons a little bit more. Think of it as being like almost like the base of a banana muffin where you just want to keep mashing it to get that flavor there. You know what? They kind of remind me of a sweet papaya. That's what I feel like. Kind of like I know it's a random fruit. And you probably haven't had a papaya if you haven't had persimmons, but it kind of has that mellow flavor of a papaya, but a little bit more sweetness because I find papaya isn't very sweet. We're going to add in a half a cup of our sourdough discard, which is good because I need to feed these up and get a loaf going or a couple loaves going. I think I want to make soup bowls this week for this. So let's add in a half a cup of our sourdough discard. Here. And we'll do 2 eggs. So 1, 2.
Yo has a question for you.
What's for dinner tonight? Well, I did go shopping today. That means I have too many options to figure out what exactly is for dinner tonight. But I'm going to have to go through it. I'm not 100% sure. Too many. When I have too many options, I'm not sure. So, but I do have salmon. I say that because that's my husband's least favorite food. But
What do you find?
because salmon is delicious and is one of my favorite foods. And everybody in our family, except my husband and Teddy, is not the biggest fan of salmon. He sometimes eats it and then sometimes he tells me he doesn't like it. So I don't know if he's truly made up his mind about whether he likes it or not. We're going to add in, let's do our baking soda first. We're going to add in a teaspoon of baking soda. I'm going to give my bacon a little swirl while we do that. So we've got our teaspoon of baking soda in here. Break them apart. I always say I love the smell of bacon. Okay, teaspoon of baking soda, again, a half a teaspoon of salt. We're going to do a half a teaspoon of ginger, though if you love ginger, you can go up to a teaspoon, works well, but I prefer more mild on the ginger side so it's not too much like a gingerbread. But a half a teaspoon of dried ginger or ground ginger, I should say. And then we're going to do a teaspoon and a half of pumpkin pie spice.
Did you have a question? Do you bake from memory or do you have recipes?
I have base recipes that I kind of are like what I have memorized for the most part. And then I kind of just change up the spices and make it for it. So this base to this recipe is kind of like my applesauce muffin, pumpkin muffin, persimmon muffin. It's kind of that base to it. And then I tweak the spices for what it is. So, and then when I go to make my recipe cards for it, I'll sit there and I'm like, okay, what did I tweak up for this time to remember it for it? But yeah, I have most of them memorized for the most part. Now it's making sure it stays in my head on there. And for it, but I just change it up with the spices. You can really use, if you have a good base recipe, you can do so much with it. So 1.5 teaspoons of pumpkin pie spice, and then 1.5 teaspoons of cinnamon. So we've got a lot of spices in here, and then we're also going to add in a teaspoon of vanilla. There we go. And therefore we get, like when I make my pumpkin muffins, I use just all pumpkin pie spice for it. But I like the kind of the mixture of it so it doesn't fall too heavily in the pumpkin pie spice. And then we add that ginger there to get kind of, a little bit of that Christmassy flavor in. You could also add in some cloves if you wanted to. Okay, we're going to mix these in now because once we add our flour in, we want to minimize the amount we mix so that our muffins stay nice and fluffy. Okay. And then I'm going to start with a cup of flour, but I'm going to base it on just how juicy my persimmons were if I need to add a little bit more in here. So if they were really juicy, then you'll need a little bit more flour to make up for that liquid, but always start with a cup and then we'll finagle it there until we get to where I want my batter to look like. So we're going to start with a cup of our flour, and I'm going to mix this in and see, because again, this is a butter base, so it should have a nice kind of thick batter to it. And we do already have some flour in here from our sourdough discard. There we go. But I think I do want to add just a smidge more. I'm going to add in, I think, about a 1/3 cup more. And I think that should get me to that nice, really thick batter. I don't want it to be too runny because one, it will take a lot longer to bake up, and then you kind of get your sugar and butter ratio off. But you just got to make sure you get it figured out with just how juicy your fruits were. And the riper they are, the more juiciness you'll get out of them. But this, we've got a good thickness to it now. Okay. Let's get our bacon turned one more time here. And then we'll be ready to put our muffins in their little wrappers and bake them up. Slide this over here. And we'll put in a little tin. You can also do these in like mini loaves as well.
How do you make persimmon cookies?
I have made them before. It's been a really long time. I have to go through. There's like a recipe that it's like a family recipe, and I have to go find it. But they were really delicious when I was a kid, but I haven't made them probably since I was a teenager. So I'll have to kind of go back through and find it. But I feel like persimmons are, you either like know them and you cook with them a lot, or you have never worked with them before. And I feel like they're like pretty easy to kind of forget about on there. I just happened to be at the store and I saw persimmons on sale, and I grabbed myself a bag, and I used to actually use them a lot when I was making homemade baby food for when my kids were little. I would always put like persimmons and dates and sweet potatoes together in like a blend for them. But I don't like they're not my favorite fruit for eating straight up. So they're really more for baking, or you can kind of roast them and whatnot for a slightly sweeter, dish for it. But again, yeah, I don't use them all that often. But I saw them and I was like, we're gonna do this. And I think these will just be, it's just a nice kind of variation on that. I always say like applesauce, pumpkin, you can use a variety of squash, sweet potato, muffin, zucchini. They're all in like that, and bananas are all in that like same family of type. So you can mash them up, different fruits, to really get that same, concept in it. We're going to go through and just kind of even these out in each one on here. And this is our lovely persimmon muffin base. We use brown sugar, which kind of go with those rich flavors, ginger, cinnamon, pumpkin pie spice, and then of course butter as well. If you like you can use oil as well, like equal parts. I prefer butter because it gives a richer muffin, but you can definitely use oil as well. Okay, let's finish these guys out. Just got a little bit more in each one. And then we're going to pop these in the oven at 350, and we're going to bake them for about 20 minutes. Now, again, depending on just how much moisture was in that fruit, it might take a little bit longer, but 20 minutes is always my base bet for this. There we go. So we're going to go pop these in, and then we're going to make our little meatballs to go in our Golabki soup. I was deciding whether I wanted to do my soup today with ground beef or if I wanted to make meatballs, and the meatballs won out. So, and I feel like that fits better with the cabbage roll, because if you've ever had a cabbage roll, it's, cabbage that's been cooked in the tomato-based sauce, but it's ground beef and rice mixed up together. So it's really lovely. So I feel like meatballs kind of adds a perfect little touch there, because you get that little meatball in there. Okay. We've got our bacon cooking here. I'm going to take it out of the pan here in a little bit once it's kind of completely crisped up for it. And I'll have to make sure I store that far away from the cameraman, because he's already licking his lips. And we're going to start making our base for our meatballs. So I have one slice of bread. I realized I need an egg, so let me grab an egg. And we're going to soak our bread in some cream, enough to make it nice and soggy, but not like dripping. And this is going to be to make our panade, which is going to be the binder for our meatballs. So we're just going to put enough in here, kind of make it and soak it up, because we want it to turn into a nice paste. And I will say for one slice of bread, it's around, 2 tablespoons of cream. And I like to use cream over milk because it's a little bit thicker in the base, but you can always use milk. You'll probably just end up needing a little bit less. So we've got our our soggy bread here. We're going to add in 1 egg. Let me get my hands a little washed, and we're going to add in spices, and then we'll mix this together, and then we'll add in our beef. There we go. Okay. So for this, I'm kind of leaning on this like savory flavor to it. So we're going to use about a tablespoon of onion powder. So it kind of has a nice onion flavor to it. And then we're going to use about a teaspoon of paprika. And you can use smoked paprika or regular one. They both work well in here. I've got some dried oregano. We're going to use about a half teaspoon of dried oregano. And again, all these spices we will also be using kind of season up our broth as well. Then I'm going to do about a teaspoon of Mrs. Dash's table blend here. I'll do a smidge more. There. That's about a teaspoon. And then we're going to do a half a teaspoon of black pepper and about a teaspoon of garlic salt, which I think is going to get me through this container. Yep. Officially empty. Okay, before I get my hands in there to kind of mix up my panade, I've got a pound of ground beef. And that's kind of what you want to use, ground chuck, ground beef. Those all work great for this. This is actually like a butcher blend, but it's all beef. So we're going to go in here with our hands and we're going to kind of squeeze and make a paste with all of these herbs just like that. And this is going to be the binder for our meatballs. And since I'm using just 1 pound of meat, you only need 1 slice of bread and 1 egg. And that's kind of my rule of thumb is for every pound of meat, it's a slice of bread and an egg. So once you've got this nice kind of flavorful paste, and this is going to season and bind the meatballs together, you can add in your pound of meat. There we go. And for a meatball, you want to kind of stick away from the lean ground beef because that's going to give you a very dry meatball on there. The higher fat works really well versus, that like 92% lean. They'll just dry out your meatballs. Okay, we're going to go through here and kind of that same base that we did for our panade. We're going to just squeeze it through our fingers until we've got it all mixed up. And that's really just the best way to incorporate it as evenly as possible. You could get a spoon and mix it up, but you got to roll these out anyways. So just get your hands dirty. Give us a little bit of toss right here. Our bacon is getting there. Okay, let's roll out these meatballs. I'm going to try to make them smaller so that, when you're eating a soup, you don't want to have a huge meatball because you want to be able to eat it in a bite. So we're going to do just little small ones. They are going to shrink up just a tad bit, but not too much. So just kind of make them a little bit smaller. But you don't have to go. Sometimes like I like an Italian wedding soup. Those have really small meatballs and you don't have to go that small. But we'll pinch these out. And because they are so small, these are going to bake up fairly quickly. And we're just going to pop them in the oven with our muffins. That way, we don't have to change the temperature or anything like that.
Do you ever put onions in your meatball?
Yes, I do. So when I make my Swedish meatballs, I kind of dice up, and it's almost for every pound of meat, it's an onion that you mince up and then you saute. So I do use onions in there. And then when I am making like pork meatballs or chicken meatballs, I will mince up green onions because I like green onions in there for it. So yes, I do. For this one, I used onion powder to kind of get you that onion flavor without that onion texture in here. And I really like the onion powder because sometimes if you don't do the saute up on the onion, then that onion flavor can be a bit sharp in your meatball.
And your barbecue meat.
Yes, and my barbecue meatballs, I also have minced up onions in it. Which I haven't made those. I think since the Super Bowl or whatnot. I haven't made those in a while. I might have to make those soon. Those are a good beef meatball recipe. I like to use lots of different variety of ground meats to make meatballs because they all have different flavors and kind of lend themselves to different cuisines and recipes. Okay. You can see how just 1 pound of ground beef is going to get us quite a few meatballs here, which is nice because then our soup will be full. And I just like this a little bit better than just doing ground beef. You can always kind of get the same flavors by just throwing in your ground beef and cooking it up in your soup. But this gives you, I think this just elevates the ground beef base of a soup a little bit nicer. And I think makes it a little bit more hearty. Okay. running out of room on here. It all starts out nice, and then I'm like, I've got to get them to fit. So just throw them in. There we go. And one more meatball. I'll steal a little bit for that guy because he's kind of fat. And if these are, I'm going to go wash my hands. We'll be able to pop those into bake here. Okay, and let me, before we pop them in, I'm just going to pull my bacon out because, again, these don't need a whole lot of time to cook up. Yeah. Our bacon's pretty crispy. I don't want it to be completely crispy like you would with a, like eating like fried bacon for breakfast. I like a little bit of the tenderness so that it doesn't go too firm in my soup. We're going to take it out now and add it back in. That's just going to keep it from its texture better versus going kind of limp in the soup or overcooking. So we'll take it as much as we can get out now, and then we can saute our veggies in this lovely kind of bacon grease, which is going to add a whole nother level of flavor to this soup that you just have to have. And then we're going to go pop these in the oven, our little meatballs in the oven, and we can take a quick peek at our muffins as they're cooking. They're about halfway done baking, but they are looking pretty good so far. Let's slide these guys right next to them, keep them company. And they will probably, they'll be done at the same time as the muffins, maybe even a little bit sooner. But with meatballs, you don't have to worry so much about overcooking them. They've got a minute before, a good time before they get overcooked. But we'll just throw those in our soup at the end so they don't need to have an additional kind of cooking time on it. Okay, now that we've got our bacon out, we are going to dice up a yellow onion and start to kind of saute it up. Our vegetables that we're going to be using here is pretty much onion, cabbage, some carrot, and a little bit of celery. I like the carrot and the addition of celery, which I don't actually use in my cabbage rolls because they get a little, like they add a great flavor to the broth. So we'll get this here. We're going to just mince it up nicely so that we can kind of get this going. There. And we'll give these a quick little stir in. Let me grab a spoon. We'll give them a nice little stir. Kind of bring out their flavors. There. Okay. And now let's get our carrots peeled. And we'll mince these up and kind of get them going. So I'm going to say a mince. We're going to do a small dice on these because I want them to get nice and tender. And again, they're really adding an enhancement to the broth, but they're not a full staple in here. But it's just a great way to squeeze in some extra veggies as well. And there is like a vegetarian, I know typically cabbage rolls are not vegetarian, but there is a vegetarian version where you actually do stewed carrots and you wrap the stewed carrots up in the cabbage. And then you kind of, stew it all in the tomatoes and it gives it like a nice tender flavor. And you've got that bulk from the carrot on the base for it. So we're going to do a nice kind of small dice on these. And that way they can kind of get nice and tender fairly quickly. Yeah. And then we also will have tomatoes in here. We're going to use both a tomato paste and diced tomatoes for our soup to kind of give you that almost that stewed tomato flavor. And get these guys in there. We'll throw those in with the onions, and we'll give them a nice stir around to kind of coat them up as well. Here. I'm going to turn it up to about a 6 now, now that we've got some more veggies in here kind of cooking off. And then for our celery, again, we don't need a whole lot of celery for this. It really just adds a great flavor to the broth. But again, I don't want it to kind of take away from the cabbage or the little meatballs. So it's going to be about, I think, maybe 2 stalks here. I'm using these little small bits, including the leaves, because the leaves add a really delicate celery flavor. So they're really lovely to add into soups as well. I know a lot of places you can just buy the celery hearts, but the leaves are wonderful additions. So don't just peel them off or get rid of them. Just cut them up and throw them in there as well. And again, a nice small little dice on here so that they aren't overpowering, but will add that wonderful flavor. Okay. Let's give this a quick little stir in here. Coat it up. And then let me grab, I realized I didn't grab my rice. I'm going to grab my rice, and that way we can start kind of sauteing it just a little bit for it. Where do I have it? Right here. So I've got my jasmine rice that we're going to add in here. I can tell the cameraman stole bacon when I stepped away. He's licking his fingers. Okay, let me grab. We don't need a whole lot of rice. I find rice really fluffs up in soup. So I kind of avoid going too much rice, and I go rather on the smaller side. Also, sometimes rice gets too fluffy that it's also nice to just cook rice and serve it on the side and then pour your soup over your rice. But we're going to add it in here because this isn't they're not using a lot. I'm just using about a half cup of rice. I am going to give it a quick rinse. That way, just to kind of get off some of that powderiness to it. And we're going to saute it in here with our veggies, almost like you would a risotto. This is going to just kind of crisp up the edges, seal in the flavor a little bit, and just start the cooking process on it so it doesn't have to simmer quite as long. But rice cooks a lot faster in a broth than you would if you're just steam cooking it for eating. So let's get those kind of sauteing up here. And we are going to add in some tomato paste. And this is going to help give our broth a really rich tomato flavor without having to use like tomato sauce. It allows you to have a nicer broth than one that kind of can err on the side of being like a tomato sauce or a tomato, like a spaghetti sauce. So the paste just gives you that loveliness without going too full tomatoey. I'm going to use about 1.5 tablespoons in here because I do want a good tomato flavor in here, but it's going to combine well with our beef broth, and it'll just be lovely. So we're going to mix this in here and kind of coat up that rice and those veggies with that tomato paste. There. Beautiful. And then a lot of our same spices that we added in our meatballs, we're going to be putting in here as well, except with the addition of some bay leaves. This adds just a nice aromatic note to the broth. So we're going to put in 2 bay leaves. And then we're going to add in about another teaspoon of paprika. Again, this helps give it a nice savory flavor that I want to just like feels like it fits with like Polish and Hungarian cuisines. Paprika is just so lovely. It kind of blends well with it. We're gonna do about a half teaspoon of oregano. And then I'm gonna do a little bit of Mrs. Dash's table blend, which is kind of just a finely ground spice of a little bit of everything. And then a little bit of black pepper, about a half a teaspoon. And that should be good. We're going to kind of coat these up in here. Beautiful. Make sure you scrape the bottom of your pan as you're going so you don't get any rice kind of sticking there. And let's get all of our little hiding little bits that love to jump up there. And then we're going to add in our diced tomatoes and then we'll do our beef broth. But I like to get our tomatoes in there kind of searing up just to get a little extra flavor. Now I'm using fresh, but you could always use like a can of diced tomatoes. I will say 2 to 3 good sized tomatoes equals about a can. There we go. And I think I might be able to get away with just 2 because these are fairly large. If you're using like the little plum tomatoes, you might need like 3 instead of that. But I think these 2 is going to get me close to a can of diced tomatoes. And I always like to saute them up just a little bit because it helps, deglaze the spices on the bottom of your pan, kind of get them off and just allows them to kind of marry nicely into your broth. So we get a little bit of those tomato elements from the tomato paste as well as the diced tomatoes. Yeah. We'll give this a nice stir up. And then we'll go check out our muffins here and see if they are just about ready. And we'll work on finishing up our soup here. We'll add in our broth, and we got to chop up our cabbage and whatnot. Let me give our little cat, you know what? They look like they're done, and our meatballs are done as well. Let me grab my oven mitt. We'll be ready to slide these guys out. Beautiful. You can see the meatballs have this nice little orangish hue to them from the paprika, which is just lovely. Adds that nice savory touch of flavor to this. Okay, we've got our meatballs. And you can see they do shrink up a little bit when you cook them. That's because their natural fat kind of seep out, which is nice because you don't want all that fat to go into your soup. So we'll be able to take those off without it. And then we've got our gorgeous persimmon muffins here that we spiced with cinnamon, pumpkin spice, and ginger, vanilla, and then brown sugar for that nice kind of fall flavors and that nice like sweetness of the persimmons. Just add a lovely like flavor and texture to these muffins that are going to be absolutely delicious. Okay, let's get our broth going in here. What we're going to be using is water with beef bouillon, but you can totally use beef broth. I just prefer beef bouillon because I can use a little bit more of it to get more flavor.
Can you go over how you made the meatball?
Yes. So with the meatballs, I started with 1 slice of soft bread, an egg, and then I added in about a tablespoon of onion powder, a teaspoon of garlic salt, a teaspoon of paprika, a half a teaspoon of oregano, and a half a teaspoon of black pepper, and a half a teaspoon of Mrs. Dash's table blend. And that's to make the panade. And you mix all of that together, and you got to soak your bread in cream first to do that. And then you mix it all together, and then you add in 1 pound of beef. And that gets you the base for your meatballs. And then you kind of roll them up and bake them.
Is garlic salt like garlic salt?
Ha ha ha. Garlic salt is the right one. Very funny. Okay, we're going to add in a little bit more. We already put our first cup in there. I add little by little, and we'll kind of scrape off the bottom as we go.
Can you use chicken as a substitute for the meatballs?
For them, you can use chicken. It's not quite the right flavor, but it does work. I prefer ground beef, but chicken does work well with that. If you're going to use chicken with this, then I would then change your broth to be a chicken broth instead of a beef broth, just to kind of stick with that notes because chicken is a little bit lighter. Okay, we've got this. Again, just little by little until it kind of incorporates together. I never try to flood it all at one time because I want it to, again, to just marry in very lovely. And turn this guy up nice and high. Get the rice cooking. And let's get our cabbage going up. So typically, you can actually use whatever color cabbage you want, but I always made Golubki, or we always called it Golubki growing up, although it's Golabki. But we always used green cabbage. But I have purple cabbage here, and it does the same thing, except it's going to give my broth a little bit more of a purple color to it. But we are going to chop up some of our purple cabbage to add in here. The cabbage doesn't need long to get nice and tender in our soup. Now, the only thing with the cabbage is make sure you cut it up into, don't shred it because you want, kind of good chunks of cabbage, but you do need to make sure that you cut up the leaf so that you're not like grabbing a giant leaf and trying to eat it. But don't shred it. So, kind of that in the middle, shredding, I just think makes the cabbage too small where you don't really get that good elements from it. Here we go. And I'm just going to break apart these chunks. That way it breaks apart a little bit easier in our soup. There we go. For this. Oh, did I lose it? Not yet. There we go. So we've got our purple cabbage here. You can use green cabbage as well for it. I'm using about, I want to say like, almost 3 cups of it because this is kind of that base for it, because with a cabbage roll you have your your beef and your rice mixture wrapped up inside that cabbage leaf, so you want a good amount in it to really give you those flavors. And then I realized I haven't added in my beef bouillon yet, so let me grab that as well. Be a very bland soup without it. And we're going to add in a big kind of heaping spoonful of this. It's going to be like around a tablespoon, a little over.
Several people in the chat have said they switched to garlic salt because they use.
Oh, good. I'm going to convert everybody because garlic salt is so good. I feel like it is a really simple way to elevate your cooking without doing much. It's just switching it out. Just that little hint of garlic just can add so much flavor. Okay, let's get this guy. We'll give it a good taste. Has very lovely little notes to it. I think I want to add a smidge more, so let me wash my spoon. I'm going to add a little bit more bouillon to it because, again, we had that tomato, so I want to season up, and I don't want it to be bland. Nobody wants a bland soup. Okay. That should be good for this. And then we're going to get ready to add in our meatballs and our bacon for it. And we're going to make a nice, lovely glaze to go on top of our muffins. Okay, perfect. I'm going to add in our meatballs. And because you don't want to use a tong to pick them up and put them in so that any of that fatty drippings from the meat stay behind, so that doesn't make your soup, too oily. But these, again, are just a lovely kind of a beef meatball. I felt like it was a nice little twist instead of just doing ground beef like sauteed in your pan. This gives you a little bit more of that cabbage roll feel to it. We'll get these guys in here. And it's just 1 pound of meat, but 1 pound of meat can make a lot of little meatballs here. And with a soup, you want to go on the smaller side. If you make your meatballs too big, then you're like having to use like a fork and knife to eat your soup. I've made that mistake before because a lot of times when I go to make meatballs, I get fatigued in making the meatballs, so they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And in a soup, you really can't have big meatballs. Okay, let's get these guys tossed up. Beautiful. And then we'll set these over here, and then we are going to make our glaze for our things. I feel like with these, a wonderful brown sugar glaze is going to work really well with the persimmons and the spices that we use. So my favorite, this is one of my favorite glazes, but it takes a little bit more, it has more steps to it than your traditional like cream or liquid based glaze. We're going to start with about 2 tablespoons of butter, and we're going to melt them off in our pan here. And once it is melted, we're going to add in 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. And you're going to kind of whisk those together until you've got a little bit of that heat. But you don't want to cook your brown sugar and turn it into candy, because if it starts to kind of even go a little bit caramely, you've got to just toss it out and do it over again. So we're going to melt that. I realized I didn't put my powdered sugar out, so let me grab that right over here. And you don't need a whole lot of powdered sugar for this. Between a half a cup and a cup to get it. But it's going to give you this just lovely, rich flavor that is just really delicious on here. And it's going to pick up that cinnamon and that ginger and that pumpkin spice in the thing. So we'll get that melted here. Let's give it a good stir. And let's get our soup a stir. And then we're going to add in our bacon while we're over here, because we're getting close to it. I can see that the rice is already starting to fluff up a little bit, so that is almost done cooking. So we're going to put our bacon in right at the best end, because this adds, again, a nice rich pop to the flavor. We did cook and saute the vegetables off in that bacon grease, so you have that, but this adds just a little bit more hint of that in there, because when I make my cabbage roll, I always drape strips of bacon over them. I know some people also wrap them up in bacon. That's a little too much work. I just strip them over the top and you get that nice flavor in it. Turn it down a little bit lower here. Okay, our butter is almost melted, so we're going to use 2 tablespoons of brown sugar in here. Give it a good swirl.
Have you tried fried cabbage?
I love fried cabbage or braised cabbage. I really, really love cabbage. And I think that's probably my mom's from Sweden. So she, we had a lot of cabbage dishes or pickled cabbage. I love pickled cabbage. But I love cabbage. Okay, we've got our butter. It's melted. We're moving it off. We're going to add in 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. And make sure you remove it from the heat, because if you cook your brown sugar so much that it turns to a caramel, it will not work in your glaze here. So we've got it mixed up here. And then we're going to add in our cream, and I'll make our glaze, and then we'll be ready to serve up, because our soup is just about ready here. It's got a wonderful boil on it, so let's turn it down. And then we're going to add in 2 tablespoons of cream. Not 1, 2. And this is to make sure that the sugar gets completely dissolved here, but you're going to get this just really rich kind of base flavor to it. And then you don't have to add it, but I like to add it, is I'm going to add a little bit of cinnamon to this. So it's kind of a brown sugar cinnamon glaze to it, and just about a half a teaspoon of cinnamon. It's also going to give it a slightly darker color. And you could do pumpkin pie spice as well. So just about a half a teaspoon. We're going to mix this base here, and then we're going to add in our powdered sugar to make our glaze. But you don't want to do it in the hot bowl, or it's going to incorporate in too much powdered sugar. So I'll turn this down again. We're going to pour it into here so that we can whisk it without it kind of melting it too much. And then start with a half a cup of powdered sugar, and then we'll slowly add it until we get the consistency I want. Always start with less and add up because it's much easier to keep adding powdered sugar than it is to add more liquid. We'll whisk it in here. And you can see how it's coming together just lovely. It's got this just great kind of rich brown color to it from the brown sugar and the cinnamon, which is just going to add so much flavor to the tops of these. And we're going to, when we get to right around the consistency of glue, you don't want it to be too viscous or it will run right off. There we go. That's about a pretty good one. So we are going to drizzle this over the top of each one. What?
If it's too viscous, it's not going to run.
No, viscous means how liquid something is. So if it's too liquidy, it will run off.
I think it's how thick and sticky it is.
Well, we'll just have to consult the dictionary when we're done, and I will make sure everyone knows that I was right again. You should see us when we play Scrabble. I love that game. And you want to know why I love Scrabble, guys? Because out of all the years that my husband and I have played, he's only beat me once, and it was on our very first date. He has never beat me ever since then. And it's not that I just beat him by a little, I slaughter him. That being said, I think we should play some Scrabble. Okay, we've got our brown sugar glaze over the top of our persimmon muffins. Our soup is ready here, so I'm going to give this just one more stir. You can kind of see how much that rice has puffed up now. Beautiful. And our meatballs. So let's serve up. Let's grab. And I'll slide these guys over here. That way we have a nice little space for it. And I think today we'll use our regular soup bowl for it. Whatever. My husband's still wrong. Yeah, I don't like having phones. But you know what? I can still say only one of us is a doctor here. I always love to pull that out. Okay, for lunch today, we have our cabbage roll soup or our Golabki soup. We made a rich tomato broth using tomato paste, beef bouillon, and diced up tomatoes. We've got our cabbage in here, our mini meatballs that we made from beef and seasoned up with onion and oregano and paprika, diced carrots, and our purple cabbage in there. So to give you all of the flavors of a cabbage roll or Golapki in the soup, but not having to do as much work. And then we are going to serve it with our delicious persimmon muffins with our brown sugar glaze. So we mashed up 4 ripe persimmons with brown sugar, cinnamon, ginger, and pumpkin spice, just as wonderful fall flavors. Bake them up so it should be nice and tender and delicious and have all those spices go together. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to our page or go to that link, search for what we cooked. We've got our cabbage roll soup and our persimmon muffins, and you can watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I've got my Dutch ovens, my bakeware, knives, cutting boards, all the different things I use in the kitchen. I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.